Welcome to Journalist Roundtable. I'm Corey Clark. Joining us this week are Pat Loeb from KYW Newsradio, Dennis Owens from ABC 27, and Charles Thompson of PennLive. Charlie, let's start with you. You wrote about the 10th district and how that's shaping up. We're a week removed from the primary. What's that election looking like in the fall?
Well, I mean, I think it looks like perhaps, like in Pennsylvania, obviously all eyes across the nation are going to be on the Trump-Biden race, right, for the presidency. And then to a lesser extent, Casey McCormick for the U.S. Senate seat. But when you get down to the U.S. House seats, the 10th, I think, sizes up as one of the most competitive in the state. And it's going to be one of those that should both parties really arm up for and do battle on. Obviously, it'll be it'll be a tremendous contest because the balance of power in the House of Representatives is on a razor's edge. Both parties are going to be vying to win every contested seat that they can. And to get to your original question, it's Scott Perry, Freedom Caucus member from Northern York County, who is seeking a 7th term in office. He's really a maverick conservative who has kind of gone his own way from the Republican conference at times, is known for saying outlandish things because he always says what he means and means what he says. And he's also known really a lot more than he ever was nationally now for being up to his eyeballs in kind of cheerleading and abetting Donald Trump's cause to stay in office after the 2020 election. If anybody had seen the January 6th special committee's hearings, Perry was a frequent flyer in that. There's been,
That's a calculated move, right? Because there are some Congress people in the state who sort of keep their distance from Trump, but others like Perry, you say.
Well, Perry was all in, and we know almost every aspect of that now. And so I mean, there's very little calculated about Perry. I mean, that's one thing you can say about that guy. He is who he is. And he doesn't really try to hide it or, tell you this thing and then do this thing. He really is what he is.
What you see is what you get.
In the race, what makes this race so interesting locally is that he's running against Janelle Stelson, the Democratic nominee, who is a longtime television anchor woman in the Harrisburg, Lancaster, York television market on the NBC affiliate here. She really soared to a pretty easy primary win, which seems to tell me that, Dennis will be pleased to know that apparently being a long-time anchor person in a television market still rates, right?
I'm making no announcements of any runs.
Yes, Dennis.
But Janelle was not, obviously because she was a working journalist, she wasn't terribly involved in partisan politics in any public kind of way. But she left the station, changed her registration from Republican to Democrat early last year, and had a about a 20 percentage point win in a hotly contested primary. And a lot of people like Emily's List and New Democratic Coalition are seemingly very excited about her candidacy, and I think they're going to give her every chance to prove herself as a candidate. So that makes the 10th really, I think for a lot of people, one to watch. Now, it is still a Republican-leaning district, and Perry has had tough fights before that he has put down, but looks like he's going to be in a fight for his life again.
Dennis, you covered this race as well, and you're also a news anchor in the same same market as Janelle.
Yeah.
Talk about her as a candidate.
Well, it's name recognition matters. I think that's one of the takeaways, and one of the takeaways from the Attorney General's race, if I could just for a moment, Eugene DePasquale, who is the former Auditor General running for Attorney General, he won in a crowded field fairly easily. He raised the least amount of money. The guy that raised the most amount of money, Jared Solomon, didn't finish last. So it's kind of interesting. Name recognition does matter. Janelle Stelson is, I think from a political standpoint, the fact that she just recently switched from Republican to Democrat, while that might hurt you in the primary, and it didn't, she was in a six-person field and easily won. That might help her in a general election with moderate Republicans that might find Scott Perry to be a little too extreme or a little too much in the Trump camp.
Yeah.
That could actually help her in this race. But I'm also reminded, now Scott Perry's going for a 7th term. And a Democratic strategist said to me, the 10th congressional is to us what Ohio is to Democrats. That is, every year we think presidentially we're going to win Ohio, and every year we don't. And he feels the same way about the 10th congressional for Democrats. It's fool's gold, he thinks. But she is a formidable candidate. The weaknesses are she doesn't live in a district at the moment. She has promised or vowed that if she won the primary, she would move into the district. Scott Perry's certainly going to make something of that.
Yes,
He already tipped his hand, although I think this might be a tough sell, Charlie. You tell me. He, on election night, said, more left-leaning, crazy left policies with Janelle Stelson. Well, that's a tougher sell when this woman has been in people's living rooms for 40 years. Mm-hmm. You can say what you want in a campaign ad, but it's like, I know, I've seen this woman for 40 years, as opposed to throwing that kind of an attack at somebody who's unknown.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays.
Right. And I mean, I think that's trying to nationalize the race, right? Because he's saying, look, if you elect Janelle Stelson, you're giving power back to Nancy Pelosi and Hakeem Jeffries. And if, the country's going to drive into a ditch with the progressive left at the steering wheel. But Perry has to fight that too, because part of the reason that district, as it was redrawn in 2018 to kind of make the 10th, and just to set the record set the context for the viewers, the 10th is a capital region district. It's Harrisburg and Dauphin County, and then most of Cumberland County and the city of York. It's a capital region district, and in that 2018 remapping, and then kind of stayed in place with the redistricting after the 2020 census. It really became a much more competitive district than it ever had been before. And the belief that Democrats have is that Perry is the guy that's a little too extreme for what most voters are in South Central Pennsylvania, in swinging purple Pennsylvania.
Well,
so we'll see.
One point to that, Camp Hill, which is in the suburbs in Cumberland County, right outside Harrisburg, and Hershey, which is in Dauphin County. 25 years ago, those are rock-ribbed Republican places. Right. They are now not. They are purple to blue. So within the district, some things have changed and seem to favor a Democratic candidate.
Yeah. So, it's going to be an interesting race for us here in the mid-state. There are other congressional races that, in the national context in Pennsylvania, will probably get a lot of attention too. The 17th in southwestern PA, represented by a freshman Democrat now who took Connor Lamb's seat, Chris DeLuzio. And maybe we think the 7th, where Republicans have gone after Susan Wild in the Lehigh Valley every time with a lot. And that's maybe the most swingy area of the state.
State Representative Ryan McKenzie is going to challenge
is a Republican candidate
in the Lehigh
there.
Valley. Yeah.
So,
and we were talking before the show, but we'll let the viewers in on this about the first district as well, down towards Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Congressman Fitzpatrick. They always seem to put someone up against him. He
Right.
was even challenged in his primary, but now he's going to face
because that's one of those districts that voted Democratic in the presidential election, but it's represented by a Republican in Congress. I think there's 16 of those nationally, and Democrats are always like, why can't we win that? But there, I mean, you can make the argument that Fitzpatrick really, he knows how to play to his people. I mean, he's one of the more moderate Republicans in the House, so nobody's going to look at him and say, well, he's an extremist. He doesn't sing from the same choir book that we have here in suburban Philadelphia. I mean, I think he actually voted for the impeachment of Trump.
Yeah.
So he reads the room.
And he's in the what is it, the Problem Solvers Caucus,
Yes.
which is sort of a moderate.
Yes.
Yeah. So he may have elevated himself to the point where Democrats now say, look, they're not going to say this publicly, but they might say, yeah, we're not sure we're going to go full bore on this. good luck, Ashley Elhaus, but we'll see.
Speaking of Philadelphia, Pat, we want to bring you into the discussion. You are the City Hall Bureau Chief for KYW. You've been around your share of mayors. Tell us about this new mayor and how she's been doing in her first few months in office. And she's had her first first conflict with City Hall, right? Or with City Council.
Yes. She is a very methodical worker, and she has gotten a lot done, but it's been kind of a slow process. She's very process oriented. And so, she says almost every time she makes an announcement, some people think I should have done this on day one, but I don't have all the answers. She made a very big production of her 100th day in office a few weeks ago. But this week was a real test, a real power struggle with City Council, her first real disagreement with them. And it was over her school board appointee. She gets to appoint 9 school board members. And one of them, a woman named Joyce Wilkerson, who has served the district for a long time. She was on the School Reform Commission back when the state controlled the school district. For some reason, there was a campaign to not seat her on the board. And it weirdly became a referendum on charter schools, which is, I say weird because Wilkerson approved 90% of charter school applications, but I guess charter school advocates thought she should have approved 100%. And they launched this real campaign against her. And City Council decided that they were going to block her nomination, or her appointment rather. And the city charter, when the city got control of the school district again, gave council the power to hold public hearings and then vote on the mayor's appointments. But no one wanted to be on the record against Wilkerson. They wanted this kind of, she doesn't have enough votes, that's what they would say, but no one would answer the question of why people don't want to vote for her. And so they were trying to kind of have their cake and eat it too. And they decided they held her appointment. They didn't hold a hearing on her. And then they said that they were withdrawing the bill appointing her, at which point Joyce Wilkerson walked out of City Council chambers, was greeted by a deputy mayor who handed her a letter from Sherelle Parker saying, I would like you to remain on the board since there's no 9th nominee approved. You just keep your seat. And so Sherelle came out of that little brinksmanship episode looking very strong, very determined. And City Council, which is also new, there's a new City Council president, a lot of new members. They looked like they really had overplayed their hand.
So she got the appointment anyway. Without them actually, so there was no vote.
Right, there is no vote on Joyce Wilkerson, but she's currently a school board member. So Parker said, well, since there's no one to replace you, you just stay.
Yes, so can you just talk a little bit more about the School Reform Commission? Because our viewers may be familiar with that. When the state took over, the governor actually had appointments on the Philadelphia School Board, but you said that was dissolved. So what is the, talk about the difference between that and how it is now?
Yeah, and most places in the state have an elected school board, and most of the school districts in the state are very small, but Philadelphia is huge. It's almost 200,000 students and a lot of schools. And so the school board here does not have taxing power and is not elected. They're just really there to oversee the school superintendent, vote on policy and things like that. That's been the case, for 100 years. But for the early part of the 2000s, the state was in charge. The school district had run out of money, and the state said, we're only going to give you more money if we get to run things. And so the School Reform Commission had 3 gubernatorial appointments and only 2 from within the city. So the state was really in charge. Joyce Wilkerson was one of the city's appointees to that school reform commission. Under Governor Wolf, there had long been a campaign to return the Philadelphia School District to local control, and Governor Wolf was amenable to that. So he really allowed that to happen 6 years ago. And so this is the 3rd school board impaneled since it became local again.
Speaking of education, Dennis, you had done some reporting on vouchers and how that's going to play into, speaking of the governor, the budget process.
Well, broadcast right here on PCN earlier this week was the Press Club luncheon, Pennsylvania Press Club. Little plug for them, and the Secretary of Education was,
and for us, thank you.
Yes, of course. And the Secretary of Education was the guest this week. He's got a couple of monumental things. We are less than 2 months until that budget's due June 30th, and there are 2 huge things on the education bucket. One has to do with totally overhauling higher education. Governor has a plan where he wants to roll in state schools and community colleges into one bureaucracy. Senate Republicans say that's not ready for prime time. We have our own plan. Meanwhile, there's less than 2 months until the budget. And then there's also the issue of K through 12 funding, public school funding, which, of course, the courts ruled last year it's unconstitutional in how it's inequitably funded public schools. The governor has called for $1.1 billion additional on top of last year's record public school funding. So at the center of all this is the Secretary of Education, Khalid Mumin, and doctor, I should say. But he mentioned in that press club luncheon, which I found interesting, that thorny issue, thorny last year, of school vouchers, which the governor supports. House Democrats do not. He said that is still being discussed. Everything is on the table. And we are still discussing that, and in theory, they like the idea, the administration that is, of school vouchers. Where that's going to come out in the budget wash, I don't know, but I did find it interesting that he said he didn't slam the door on it, and he said it's still on the table.
Charlie, this is something that's been coming up around here for a while, right?
Yeah. I remember, not that viewers want to know my history, but I started covering state government in 1999, the start of the second Ridge administration. And one of the first big stories that I was thrown into was a titanic struggle to get a school voucher bill passed that spring. And, Democratic lawmakers were being called into John Purcell and Matt Ryan's offices one by one, especially John Purcell. He was the majority leader at the time. And, promised this kind of grant or that kind of grant or this action on a bill if you come over and support these vouchers. And, they couldn't get it done. They were really close. But they couldn't get it done. And then that thing has just, it's like a lot of issues. It's been kind of a perennial. I mean, because it's really become more of one of the policy commandments of the Republican Party in that generation. I mean, Republicans everywhere seem to want school vouchers now. That wasn't so much the case back then, but there have been some efforts from time to time to try it. We had Governor Corbett who wanted school vouchers, but he had a very tough time working with the legislature throughout his term. Governor Wolf was a hard no on it. So sometimes, Shapiro famously last year in his campaign said he is open to it and actually would support it. But, he's got this legislative equation to work out because the thing is, there might be some votes in the House Democratic caucus. Almost certainly there are for it. But it's one of those things where they have to be cognizant of the majority of the majority. And that's what happens a lot in the state legislature, right? It's like, well, if 90% of my caucus is against this thing, I, as a caucus leader, it does me no good at the end of the day to push it through because, they might push me overboard and elect a new leader. Leaders have a lot of power, a tremendous amount of power in the legislature, but they are answerable to their caucus members. And so there's so much they can do. Now, sometimes you can knit together a deal, like maybe they can get a deal for something else that's Democrats really want, like a minimum wage increase. I just say that hypothetically. In order for, we have to let our people vote how they want on vouchers, and those kinds of grand compromises can work, but they often don't.
Pat, talk about the Philadelphia mayor's relationship with Harrisburg when it comes to all this kind of stuff, because she's a former legislator, right? And also your city council president is a former legislator. So has any of those relationships come into play when it comes to city of Philadelphia getting Harrisburg monies?
Well, Sherelle Parker's service in the state house is a point of pride with her. She talks about it all the time, and she uses the phrase intergovernmental cooperation in almost every speech. She's very into working with her partners at other levels of government to get things done in Philadelphia. And so, yes, Kenyatta Johnson talks much less about his service in Harrisburg, but we also have Councilman Mike Driscoll, who is in the State House. So that's it seems to be a common commute from Harrisburg to City Hall in Philadelphia.
Dennis, I want to talk about the latest poll when it comes to Pennsylvania and the national election, or the presidential election, I should say.
Our parent company Nexstar commissioned a poll from Emerson College and The Hill, and we just released the results this week. And talking about the battleground states, and for folks that don't know, the presidency is probably being determined by 7 states. A relative handful of votes in a relative handful of states are going to decide who the next president is, or who wins the election in November. The polls showed in all 7 of those battleground states, Donald Trump has a slight lead in every one, including Pennsylvania. This is the largest of those battleground states. Now, small lead within the margin of error, but the pollster that did the poll said, well, in 16 and in 20, at this stage of the race, Donald Trump trailed. So what does it mean that he has a lead? Again, it's a plus or minus margin of error of 3, and it's less than 3 in most all of those states. Pennsylvania's just 2+. But that can't be good news for Joe Biden, and I have a feeling he's well aware of it, because last week he was in Pennsylvania not once, not twice, but 3 times in different parts of the state, of course. And I don't know if you've heard, but he's from Pennsylvania.
And his wife as well. Yes, and in that polling, there was a plurality of independent voters that were also for Trump. So how important are the independents?
Well, the independents, of course, are huge, of course, and the plurality did show that. Another odd thing that Pennsylvania, 2 of the 7 battleground states, they asked the same question. If Donald Trump were to be convicted in New York, would you be more likely to vote for him or less likely to vote for him? Now, your gut would tell you that people would be less likely to vote for him, but independents in Pennsylvania actually said they'd be more likely to vote for him should he be convicted. So interesting results there.
And that same poll also put out some numbers on the United Senate race.
Correct. Bob Casey, though he doesn't have 50, he didn't cross the 50 number. He leads Dave McCormick. Bob Casey looking for a 4th term U.S. Senate Democrat. Dave McCormick, the challenger, trails by 4. Most of the experts and analysts I talked to, and I think even Bob Casey has said, that's going to be closer than that they anticipate this is going to be a very close race. And I know our analyst on our show, his name's Chris Nicholas, said the last 3 times Bob Casey has won, it's just the way the luck of the draw has been. It's been a positive year for Democrats. Like, he had some wind in his sails in each of those that helped. It's going to be just neutral, or maybe even he might have some headwinds this time around. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. They're saying that's going to be within 1 or 2 points.
Yeah, I feel like Casey didn't even have the best of the best Democratic or Republican challengers either. It's almost like the Republicans have taken a pass on Casey because,
his name is kind of the gold standard in the state.
I mean, this is easily. No, to his credit, he did defeat Rick Santorum to become a U.S. Senator, so there was that. But this is easily the toughest race that he's faced since then.
Talk about ticket splitting, because if the states go, this state
Yeah.
looks like it's going for Trump, but Casey is also leading.
So in
is
our
that,
poll, for instance, Donald Trump was leading in the presidential race, and Bob Casey was leading in the Senate race, and our pollster said that's not good news for Biden either, because it shows people are able to split that ticket and they're able to, to go for the Democrat, but they weren't doing that for Biden. So there are certainly some warning signs for the president.
Charlie, there's I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that school board story you wrote about the actor, where the school board stepped in and canceled it, but then they retracted that.
Yeah, 30 Rock fans, listen up. Malik Pancholi, a former actor on the NBC hit 30 Rock, has a side career as an author for middle school age groups, and he's written some highly regarded books for that age group. And he has since been invited to do school presentations where he talks about anti-bullying and how to find your voice if you feel different, and how other kids should honor those kids that are different and that sort of thing. It's really a pretty unobjectionable message. He was scheduled to come in and do a talk at Mountain View Middle School in the Cumberland Valley School District, which is one of the larger school districts here in central Pennsylvania. And out of the blue, in a board meeting that I tuned into for budget news, at the end of that meeting, a board member made a motion from the floor and said, I would like to disinvite this individual from this assembly at Mountain View Middle School. And they got to talking about it, and he kind of said the quiet part out loud. He said, well, he labels himself as a political activist. It's right there on his website. So, and they talked a little more, and he says, I just don't, he's a homosexual and he's an activist, and I don't want to see somebody pushing that lifestyle on these kids at that age group. And so some board members were trying to take the tack of, well, we don't want political activism in school, because Cumberland Valley got their hands slapped for that in 2016. They hosted a Trump rally on the school campus. Lots of people pushed back hard on that. So the district has sort of adopted this informal policy, like if there's anything political, we're going to steer way clear of it.
So what caused them to reverse the decision?
Well, because it was seen as, basically they reduced this guy's presentation to he's a gay man, and he's going to come in here and he's going to preach about a lifestyle to our kids. They voted 8-0 to disinvite him. Caused a tremendous pushback from parents in the district, which became a story that got picked up by the New York Times and CNN and the Today Show, and before you knew it, Cumberland Valley was like really sitting there with a big fat black eye, and even the school administrators, this was pretty rare, who work at the whim of the school board. I mean, they run the schools, but they do serve at the pleasure of the school board. They wrote a letter basically distancing themselves from that decision and saying, we're very disappointed in that. It doesn't reflect who we are. And the board quickly scheduled a special meeting, and I think the pressure got too great. And they said, we apologize, we're going to re-invite him. And it was kind of a victory of people power,
All right, well, we'll have to end it right there. I'd like to thank our guests, Pat Loeb from KYW Newsradio, Dennis Owens of ABC 27, and Charles Thompson of PennLive. Thanks for watching Journalist Roundtable. I'm Corey Clark. Good night.